Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today is one of those days where I got very much annoyed at people who self-describe as right-wing agreeing with a communist getting absolutely everything in analysis wrong once again. And so I suppose we should go through the analysis first. Navarra Media posted a clip from a recent video of theirs saying Ash Sarkar breaks down the real reason British culture is crumbling. Hint it's got nothing to do with immigration. And I take many issues with things said in this clip, so we may as well go through it first.
Thing about love of culture, love of place, love of specific local identities is that the people who've done the most damage to that are those who've been most in favour of corporate power.
Yeah. I mean, already I need to question, who do you mean then? Who do you mean? Because the main reason I have an issue with corporate power is that they lobby the government to effectively kick out all competition. Competition within, the system of the free market that allows small and medium businesses to grow. I work for and know plenty of people in the small to medium enterprise industry, and the thing they mostly complain about is the fact that government effectively stops them being able to grow. Who lobbies for that? Big businesses that can afford all the extra legislation and taxes that come on top of their profits. We got a energy price cap. Now we have, 6 energy companies, something like that? We used to have 77. Who pushed for the price cap? Shell, BP, people that could afford it. Are these people that care about localised British culture? Probably not. I happen to know people in the fracking industry, CEOs of these companies, who are trying their best to get fracking done. And they happily give out money to local carnivals that keep local culture going. But the big and this is a corporation, by the way, that I'm talking about, but the big corporations that are already established and lobbying government, they don't care. They will give out money, but it will be to international charities. I know for a fact that some corporations, Manchester Airport, B&M as 2 examples, have literally given money to sponsor local carnivals that keep local culture going. I know that for a fact. So again, to blame this all, well, they're not blaming it all on it, but to bring in as a main point people who are in favour of corporate power, give me specifics, because it's not all corporations, and it's certainly not everyone who is a corpro.
Yeah. Of just the of deindustrialization, of breaking up communities quite forcibly.
I mean, again, I even have issues with this. That has certainly happened around the UK, but then there are these areas that were deindustrialized that then reinvented themselves. 2 things happened with deindustrialization. Either everyone moved out to big cities to find jobs, or people stayed there and created new industries. There was a 3-part video I did on Grace Blakely talking about the horrors of capitalism, and she came up with plenty of examples of places that deindustrialized and then turned into tourist destinations. Again, I think we need better industrial strategy. I think we do need to get more into manufacturing. I'm completely fine with that. But I suppose this is my main point. Everyone I've been talking about so far has a very London-centric view. The problem with Ash Sarkar, aside from the fact she doesn't identify as British, unless someone else says she's not British, by the way, is that she's part of the leftist intelligentsia that is very London-centric. The very type that George Orwell talked about all the time in the 40s, that just hate Britain. And in this case, Ash Sarkar is basically blaming the British reacting to their own circumstances as ruining British culture. The thing with culture is that it's ever-changing and evolving. And again, it's something else that George Orwell talks about. From his essay, England, Your England, George Orwell says, what can the England of 1940 have in common with England of 1840? But then what have you got in common with the child of 5 whose photograph your mother keeps on the mantelpiece? Nothing, except you happen to be the same person. In other words, you can keep looking back at 19th century Britain, 20th century Britain, and you can say, well, I've got not an awful lot in common with them, but the ultimate point is that you're both English or both British. It doesn't really matter. You can kind of use them interchangeably. And the British culture we have now is, well, British culture. Just because it's different from 50 years ago doesn't mean it's not British. And this is a problem I'm seeing absolutely everywhere. People are literally seeing in real time British culture evolving quite rapidly in some places, especially in big cities, and saying, oh, that's not British, when in reality it's just British people reacting to the circumstances they find themselves in. We have a very big cohort of millennials that are left-wing. We may not like it, but that is British culture now. majority wanting socialism, and I think it's terrible and I don't want it, but it's the culture I find myself in, and I can only influence it in any way I can by making these videos, by going out in the real world and joining in on a culture where it exists. As I always bring up, there's local communities in the Welsh village I find myself in. I join in with them, whether it's at the church or the horse yard. I go back to my mum and dad's village all the time back in England to join in with local activities there, which is part of the local culture. And just to make it clear, my parents come from a village that industrialised in the 18 to 1900s and has generally industrialised since then, deindustrialised since then. And they've reinvented themselves. It's a bit of a hub for business owners and footballers, but this frankly is what everywhere has to do. If your main source of income goes for the community, you have to find another one. And you'd be surprised how successful that can be. And guess what? Corporations can help out in that. You see it everywhere in Britain, even in history. Hell, entire towns were made at the behest of business owners, of corporate owners, to house their workers. And wouldn't you know it, they made local communities from it. It's very short-sighted to say it's corporations ruining British society. Corporatism is British society. It's ridiculous to think otherwise.
And boomers embraced American culture, American TV, American music, American habits more than anybody else. So
I completely reject this claim. Just mainly from anecdotal evidence from pretty much every boomer I know. They certainly had American influences, from American films to American TV to American music, but my mum and dad especially, say with the rock scene, my dad liked his rock music. Yeah, he liked Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Yeah, he likes REM. But my God, he would say nothing is better than the Rolling Stones, than Black Sabbath, and the Beatles. My mother's less into music, but even today she still mainly watches British dramas, British comedies, British TV programmes and films, more than the American ones. Same with pretty much every boomer I know, by the way. You then get to the millennials, language is literally changing because they're watching so much American stuff, because they're consuming so much American media. And Zoomers, well, they just didn't have a chance. To think that the boomers were the ones to bring in American culture to influence British culture is absolutely absurd. British patriotism is kind of a boomer pastime at this point. You get to Gen X and beyond, it starts to wane. You get to the millennials, they hate Britain more than they love it, as is kind of being proven by Ash Sarkar and Aaron Bastani here. And then you get to the Zoomers, and there's a bit of a resurgence of patriotism because, well, they realise what hating Britain gets you. Gets you a bunch of foreigners. And frankly, cultural aspects that they just do not vibe with is probably the best way to put it.
If you want to talk about a diluting of an English identity...
Yeah, totally.
It's very much them.
Nonsense. Complete and utter nonsense. In absolutely every aspect of British culture that I see being pushed forward, whether it be at the church, whether it be at the yard, it is being massively pushed by the boomers. The boomers are the last bastion, the last stalwart of British culture, of defending it. Absolute nonsense from Ash Sarkar, and the only thing that the two things I reckon that this comes down to is one, well, as I said before, Ash Sarkar doesn't self-identify as British, so what's she gonna know? And secondly, I mean, that's a coat, by the way. She has spent all her life in London. And I suppose that leads on to my second point. This is a very London-centric problem, and probably a problem with bigger cities in general. They don't know English and British culture because they don't go out like George Orwell did and try and research it, try and discover it, try and write down what it means to be English, to have this culture for other people. I mean, Callum, who runs the travel channel Britannica, a couple of years ago now, he did a video discovering different places in England, tourism in merry old England, and he specifically went to the least English places, the places where, it's like 5% white, something like that, and it's 90-odd% Asian or whatever, to really show you this difference. And amazingly, most of the places that were least English were in London. As I say, this is a London-centric issue. And then obviously he goes off to the north and to Wales and other areas of England to point out, I don't think he went to Wales actually, doesn't matter, but to point out that actually English identity and culture is still alive and well. And in the screenshot I have now, he's actually at Jeremy Clarkson's Diddley Squat Farm. Again, another boomer, a boomer who is massively trying to push to keep English culture alive. And how is he doing it mostly? funding it through effectively corporatism. He wants Diddley Squat Farm to turn into a corporation, which obviously people in the local village do not like, because again, another massive part of our culture is nimbyism, which again, I don't particularly like. It's completely different to the attitude that the British had back in the 19th century, but as George Orwell says, just because I don't have much in common with them doesn't mean we're both not British. And again, this is why we have a culture war, by the way. We have people like Jeremy Clarkson who want it to be a bit more yimby, while at the same time making the countryside still completely beautiful. And then we have the NIMBY side who don't want anything built whatsoever, and basically to keep Britain as a museum of, the past. That is the British culture war at the moment. And then another issue you have is that there's another faction that basically wants to bring in a load of foreigners, which, as you will be able to see in the Tourism in Merry Old England video, is effectively making parts of England unrecognisably English, where they have absolutely no, and I mean this, absolutely no connection to the past. And that is pretty much the main thing that actually makes you British, your connection to these isles and their past. And that's the point I'm trying to make here, but Ash Sarkar has a very, very modernist view of culture, where effectively people seem to think that British culture means keeping it as a museum, as a time capsule of a particular period or your favourite bits of different periods of Britain. And as much as I go on about having Victorian values, I am aware that that has to as well come with the fact that there will be progress at the same time. But this is the thing, as Disraeli said, England is a progressive country, so it's always going to be changing. The problem is that you also need to keep the long-standing traditions that keep it British at the same time, including rule of law, having a monarchy, having everyone represented in Parliament. Many, many traditions like that. Family values, of course, is another one. But this is the problem. That is all being eroded, and I think it's fair to say that foreign influences are not helping things like that. I do not think it's right that we allow people into Parliament who are openly saying that they are making their oath to the king under protest and don't really mean it. I know Clive Lewis had to redo it, but I think that should be a one-chance thing. You made the protest, you're not sitting in Parliament for 5 years. Go away till you're elected again. Or until you accept there should be a by-election. And is that down to foreign culture? Yes, that is a very French attitude to having a Parliament. Our Parliament, specifically, needs the Crown in Parliament to be a British Parliament. That is a tradition that is unnegotiable. And yet we allow this French influence in to say, oh yeah, of course you can have Republicans openly in, stating that the king shouldn't be here, and not making that oath they have to do to him. No, that is nonsense. Get it out of here.
And it's not the same in different European countries. And I always think this whenever I go travelling in France or in Italy.
Okay, interesting. Once again, thinking to the Paris opening ceremony, that was a very, very American-centric opening ceremony. What was specifically French about this? Not an awful lot. I could imagine any country in the world doing this. And you compare it to our 2012 opening ceremony, which, aside from the NHS nonsense, everyone generally regards as a pretty good opening ceremony, one that really made you feel that it was actually okay to be patriotically British for once, and had British humour and icons involved in it. Tom Cruise was part of the closing ceremony. What's French about that?
And you go to a little village and you come across them when they're doing their specific village thing.
This, again, is why I think this is a very, very London-centric view of Britain. This happens everywhere. This happens absolutely everywhere. Hell, you just watch Clarkson's Farm. Pretty much every series will have something specific that Chipping Norton does for its culture. Obviously, in the latest series, it was that massive tractor drive through the town at Christmas. Hell, I've been part of things that my specific little community does, such as a harvest festival through the town. Hell, as I always go on about, the carnival for the Catholic Church that goes on every year, that everyone in the local community comes to. In the place I moved to in Wales, every now and then at the Catholic Church, they'll do a folk mass where they'll basically do all the hymns in Welsh, with words put in there specifically written by local people. Garden parties happen at that church. Hell, we move over to the yard. They always have a fancy dress party at Christmas that, again, the local community there get involved with. If it's someone's birthday, there's always an excuse, again, to get the whole local community involved for fun and games, as you classically would do at a village. This happens everywhere. This happens everywhere in Britain. People in London don't know it, though, because all they are surrounded by is American consumerism, and the idiots think that that applies to the rest of England, or Britain. And it simply doesn't. It's moronic to think so. It just shows how ironically small-minded these people are.
Right? And it's so specific, right? So there's this one place in the south of France where they've got this ball game and they play it off the wall of a church, and they say that they've got the Coupe du Monde, the World Cup, every year, and all the young people who live in Marseille and live in Paris or live in Berlin, they all come back every year. There is dancing, there's food, there is wine, there's loud music late into the night.
Yeah, nothing comparable to that in Britain. There's not some stupid game that happens in British villages where people from all over the world come to get involved with that culture, is there? There's nothing comparable like that in Britain. There's not the cheese wheel down the hill that we see every year. That makes international news every year because it's so unique. Hell, you can go to a number of villages throughout England, even in Scotland, but we'll stick to England for now, where they still do a day a year where they just play medieval football, which is basically just an excuse for men to punch each other. These uniquely British things still happen. They just don't happen in London. Why don't they happen in London? Well, hint, probably because of immigration. Where do all the Cockneys live now, Ash? Where have all the Cockneys gone? They moved to Anglia, they moved around. They don't want to stay in London because of the mass immigration. You ask any Cockney that has moved out of London, they will cite that at least in their top 3.
You can't do that in a culture where you've got fucking nosy neighbours ringing up the council the minute it gets to 9 p.m, which is the culture that we have.
Thank you for accepting that part of British culture is indeed nimbyism and not allowing places to be open after 10 p.m. or 9 p.m, whatever. And that is actually genuinely a problem, I think, that we have. And George Orwell even wrote about that with pubs. How Britain has this weird thing where as soon as it goes past like 11 p.m, every pub in the country has to close. And he always says people in Europe would find that mad, and he himself finds that mad, and even landlords and people in the country find that mad. But rules are rules and everyone follows them. And yes, as I said before, nimbyism, yes, is a big part of British culture. Now, as I keep mentioning with my parents' village, they recently built a village hall with funds raised at the carnival that they've been doing for 6 years now. Can't have celebrations in that hall past 10 p.m. because it's right next to the priest's house and he wants to get some sleep, which absolutely everyone finds ridiculous, but you can't exactly say, sorry, father, we are going to go on till 2 a.m. because we've got a wedding to celebrate. The English aren't rude like that. The English do respect the elderly woman ringing up to make a noise complaint at 9 p.m. However, having said that, again in my parents' village, for my brother and sister's 21st, they did a marquee in the back, 2 separate times for both their 21st, but every time they did it, they made sure to let the neighbours know. They'd go all the houses 5 each way, even up to the road opposite, and just let them know, listen, we're having a 21st celebration, it's going to be loud, it's probably going to go late into the night, do you mind? And everyone was like, yeah, fine. And in fact, some even came around with presents, despite, not really knowing my parents and the family too well. They still came around to say happy birthday to my brother and sister. I because I was born 10 years later, I had to do it in, have it organised at a venue, but still, either way. This culture still does exist, and the culture of Britain is, it's better to ask permission than ask for an apology. If you let people know in advance that there's going to be loud music and things like that, they'd probably be okay. The priest would probably be okay with a wedding being done at the venue if it was organised in advance and, he made plans to either stay elsewhere or, buy some earmuffs or something. I don't know. But again, Ash Sarkar wouldn't know any of this because Ash Sarkar didn't do what Callum did and actually travel around England to find out. Just makes all the assumptions that, Britain's just like London, when actually London's practically a foreign country at this point.
Similarly, in Italy, where you've got such a strong sense of identity, again, remember travelling through and ended up in a conga line, around the village square, because they were celebrating the priest having been there for 50 years and they're having a big party.
My God, again, my local church back at my parents', we had a priest there for 20 years. That was a big celebration for that. Hell, I remember, I don't know, I was about 6 or 7 at the time. I mean, he wasn't a priest. He was a canon. And I remember for a whole month, there was just celebrations in children's liturgy saying, he's retiring. We're going to make things for the celebration for him. One of them was all the kids need to draw a picture of, Canon Dwyer, I think his name was. And obviously some kids hear the word cannon and draw an actual artillery piece. That stuck in my memory because again, it's just, I am just speechless that Ash Sarkar could effectively be so ignorant about this. Again, she's lived in the country all her life. The problem is she's lived in London all her life. So she doesn't really know what England's like, and it's really showing here. And it's kind of mental to me that Aaron Bastani isn't pushing back on any of this, because he lived in Brighton most of his life. And Brighton, again, has pretty unique aspects about it that are still done today, and I just don't know why he's not pushing back on it. Unless, I know Brighton does their Pride March every year, but again, I don't think he can actually say that that's not due to American consumerism. Hell, Politics Joe did a Vox Pop there, actually. I remember covering it. And a lot of people were actually complaining that corporatism's kind of ruining it. Like, yeah, American corporatism specifically as well. And it's like, yeah, people don't like this. People are pushing back on this. And the fact that there's absolutely no acknowledgement of that from Ash Sarkar, again, just speaks volumes. What she isn't saying here is speaking volumes of how little she knows about the country she's lived her life in.
Now, these are exactly the things that have been destroyed not by immigration, but by capitalism and secularism.
So antisocial behaviour and secularism are what is killing British society, I guess. Well, the problem is if we weren't secular, we'd be openly Christian. And if we were openly Christian, we probably wouldn't be as tolerant to other religions as we are. We probably wouldn't allow call to prayers in Muslim areas of Britain. We probably wouldn't allow huge celebrations of Dali in the street. Multiculturalism basically wouldn't exist because we'd say, go to church. And I suppose there is a point to it that, most of the examples I have from my personal life do come from, a religious setting. But the other ones I brought up, the medieval football game, basically everything to do with Clarkson's farm, that's all pretty secular. It's all very secular, actually. It doesn't matter if you're Christian or not. So I don't entirely buy that secularism's killing culture. And when it comes to antisocial behaviour, I mean, I don't see why people being antisocial would necessarily kill these cultural aspects. In the day-to-day realm, having said that, it has certainly changed an awful lot of people's attitude when it comes to cities. Listen, this is something that I have seriously seen ramp up in the past couple of weeks. People are openly talking about moving away from big cities that I know of. Plenty of my friends are saying it. People in London still want to seem to stay in London, but from what I understand, the way kind of London works there is that they all stay in their houses anyway. Like, if they go out, it's because they need to go to a shop or something. I don't see many pictures or hear many stories of them going out. And then if they are going to do that, they go outside of London for like a weekend. So this is also not uncommon to hear in the news that people simply will not get their phones out. You see it on Twitter, actually. There's stories of people getting their phone stolen, and people like, you got your phone out in London? Why would you do that? Obviously it's going to get robbed. Obviously that is a negative aspect of culture, but again, London is a hub of immigration, big cities are, and this is culture I'm seeing developing in big cities where effectively you cannot be very trusting of the society around you. I don't see that so much in my parents' village, in the village I've moved to in Wales. And there's antisocial behaviour here, but not to the point where I feel unsafe. I've been shot at by a BB gun by some kids in a car. And I wasn't particularly bothered by it, because I know it's a very rare occurrence, and, I mean, it's not like they're trying to kill me. We had another stabbing in Leicester Square yesterday. London isn't a safe place and people know it, but the rest of England feels fairly safe. But Navarro media don't know that because they don't go there. They'll happily travel around villages in France, villages in Italy, but they won't do it in England. Because again, they suffer from this, ironically, very, very English attitude from the leftist intelligentsia that hates Britain and England, to the point where they're not even bothered to go out and find out if what they're saying here is true. Oh, is it true that there's no culture in England anymore? Is it just all Americanized? No. Total nonsense. It's only true in big cities.
Right? Like, what are the things which preserve a sense of really, really specific local identity?
Go on, Ash. Give us your infinite wisdom of what has kept London with its local identity it completely hasn't lost over the last 2 decades.
Right? It's not having total corporate domination of leisure and entertainment.
Again, I have to bring it up every time. Corporations were do sponsor, just in general, local carnivals. They allow local culture to thrive. I hate this whole idea of, oh, American consumerism's ruined everything. British consumerism is keeping the culture alive.
Whereas we've welcomed that with open arms. We're like, you know what? Fuck it. We don't want our local thing anymore. We want a Hollywood Bowl. Like, we did that to ourselves.
Pray tell, where is the Hollywood Bowl in Britain? I mean, are we really going as far as saying having amphitheatres in the UK is American? That's effectively what is being said there. Musical amphitheatres are all over the world. You know, they come from Roman culture. They've been seen in Britain for millennia. They've been seen all over Europe for a millennia. Oh, America finally builds one in Hollywood, and all of a sudden it's American culture to have an amphitheatre for music concerts? Are you kidding me?
It's having a local high street with local independently owned businesses. We've given that up.
Yeah, there's two things mainly cited when businesses go down under, especially local businesses. Very, very high rents tend to be one of them. Why's that happened? Due to no small part by mass immigration, asks Sharkar. And the second one, obviously, is high corporation tax. High taxes, that's what they all say. Who wants higher taxes? Ash Sarkar wants higher taxes. Literally everything Ash Sarkar wants and cites as being a problem literally comes from her politics. Absolutely insane.
Is about having attendance of community organisations, whether they're religious like churches or whether they're working men's clubs or whether they're trade unions. Again, decimated those.
My God, bringing up trade unions again. Trade unions are specifically only a thing that's really become massive since the post-war. It's a very 20th century thing. And most people hated them. Most people still hate them. Especially the boomers, they absolutely hate them because of the 3-day week. Unless you were someone who managed to get a pension from the age of 30 thanks to trade union powers and Margaret Thatcher effectively bribing these people, then you hate trade unions. That's just how it goes. Unless you're a millennial and you have no idea that any of this happened. And then you love them because you think, oh, I have all my working rights because of trade unions, when the fact of the matter is that you probably lost most of your workers' rights because of trade unions because people hated them. But yes, the only way to keep a local culture going is by getting involved. I mean, people are actually seeing an issue with this right now. One of my friends runs or helps run a local history society, and the younger people just don't want to get involved in actually organising lectures, organising events for things like that. People are just getting lazy. And honestly, I think a big reason for that is the internet, and I know that I am part of the problem here, because I know that I'd rather waste my time on the internet playing online games, things like that, than actually going out to my local community and doing things. This is part of the reason why I make myself go to church every week, so that at the very least I know that I have done something small for my local community. And it's even being recognised. I had a lovely old woman say to me, because the place I usually sit was taken when I get to church because I was late. So I sat on the other side, and an old lady said to me, oh, it's nice to see you on this side of the church. We had a bit of a conversation. Like, you are appreciated for being involved in your local community. It does happen. It's little things like that. And it's still alive and well throughout Britain. Just not in London, probably not in Birmingham, probably not in central Manchester. It's a damn shame, I agree, but to blame it on any one thing in particular, and especially to blame it on corporatism and capitalism, is completely moronic. Places where we are seeing an erosion of this type of culture just so happen to be in areas where mass immigration has occurred. The best bit of evidence I have for that is Callum's video on Britannica, link in description.
And then we go, oh, it's the immigrants who've come here and weakened our culture. No, like it's the embrace of a particular kind of capitalism at the expense.
Claphamization of Britain.
The Claphamization of Britain. I am therefore going to take this as an indication that Novara Media agree that Clapham has lost its English identity and is effectively a hodgepodge of God knows what. It's a culture that is distinct from English culture. I am taking that as an admission from Novara Media that Clapham is not distinctly British and English anymore. We have a quick look on that, a godsend of an ONS map on demographics, and you'll see that only about 6% of people in Clapham, Common North, and obviously the areas around, somewhere around 6% of people identify as English only. You expand that to English and British, and it goes up to about 8%, so that is, about 6, about 8, add them together, 14. About 14% of Britain in Clapham, or at least central Clapham, would identify themselves as English in any way. Obviously, some areas around are slightly darker here, so that probably goes up to about 20%. Point being generous, 1 in 5 people would consider themselves English in Clapham at a push. And I even checked British-only identity, that's about 60%, something like that. Problem I have with that is that that obviously includes non-native people, basically saying that they've integrated, which I'd generally be fine with. However, as George Orwell said, what do these people who consider themselves only British, but not, say, English, Welsh, Scottish, Northern Irish, what do they have in common with someone from 1924, with someone from 1824? The problem is it's not as much, I'm afraid. And this is exactly why there's been a bit of a resurgence in saying, we want absolutely no immigration. Because from Novara Media's own point of view, Clapham isn't English anymore. That's what Novara Media is saying. I don't know, I've not been to Clapham in ages. But according to them, that is the degradation of culture. An area where hardly anyone, about 1 in 5 people, again at a push, see themselves as English. Is any wonder that English identity's gone from there?
It's turning everywhere into Clapham. You're completely right about that.
No, everywhere in London is turning into Clapham. Everywhere else in the UK is doing pretty good.
And the thing that pisses me off is that when you tell me I hate England, I'm like, no, I love this shit. I love the fact that Denby Dale made a really, really, really big pie in the 80s and again in the millennium. And I want them to make a big pie again.
Okay, Denby Dale still has a bit of an obsession with pies. They're so obsessed that they have the Pie Hall, which effectively has a mini museum to the history of pies and is used by the locals for events, has a bar, private hire, all that. Again, this still exists, Ash. It's not my fault that you think everywhere is like London. It is not. And I hope I've made that point by now. Anyway, if this was just Ash Sarkar being an idiot in a clip, I would not have made a video on this, because all of this is fairly obvious to anyone who lives outside of London. No, I had a problem with right-wingers lording over this frankly embarrassing analysis of British culture. Collingwood, one of those post-liberal types who has a rather large following on Twitter and is a member of the SDP, said, "On this specific matter, Ash is correct. The type of capitalism we have chosen and laissez-faire attitude we have to the destruction of communities compared with other smaller nations, is a key reason for the erosion of British culture and low TFR for that matter, i.e. low birth rates." Total nonsense, complete nonsense. Compared with other European nations, we have pretty much the same fertility rate, so I don't know what he's going on about there. But this might be an issue because we're so Britain-centric on Twitter that we don't really hear all the people of France and Italy complaining that actually their big cities are losing their Italian identity. You probably don't hear that as much, but it's probably a similar thing that they complain about. And, the laissez-faire destruction of communities. Again, if we're just doing this to go on about Thatcher, go ahead. But again, it's complete nonsense. Even Grace Blakely points out that successful communities reinvented themselves post then and still have these local communities going. And again, we don't have a laissez-faire attitude even compared with other European countries. We're quite low on the free market index for a start. No, the problem is that via taxation, an awful lot of wealth is just extracted to the point where everyone has to move to London to actually be able to somewhat live, or if they're lucky, get a remote job. And then most of that money is taxed to then go straight to, say, social housing for immigrants, straight to 11 billion going to foreign countries to solve the climate crisis, quote unquote. Basically, local communities are dying because all of our money that we should have to spend on the local community is being hoovered up by the government. To say that that is a laissez-faire attitude is moronic. No, this is planned. And whatever their intentions are doesn't matter. The point is that this is a planned economy, effectively, to extract money from basically everywhere to put it into central London so that half the people in social housing can be foreign. That's just the world we live in. And if you want to call that capitalism, then I am not surprised you're a part of the SDP. But I think the more surprising response came from Tim Stanley, who at first referred to Ash Sarkar as his friend, which was somewhat surprising. This is a guy who writes for The Telegraph, by the way, just so we know, and typically he is usually quite right-wing on things, but this is just stupid. You're not living in a caliphate. Let's not get into that. You're living in a post-industrial, secularised 51st state of American consumerism. And then at least he brings up mass migration, but my God, The 51st state of American consumerism is London. It's not the rest of Britain. How do I know? I live there. My God, you go to any local... You go to my parents' local supermarket, you go to my local supermarket, there's American stuff all over the place, sure. There's a hell of a lot more British stuff. There are Union Jacks, Welsh flags here, on an awful lot of the produce made. There is plenty of stuff you see on shelves that sure say made in China, but will also say, designed and made in the UK, something like that. It's just nonsense to say that American hegemony has ruined the UK. No, it has ruined London and big cities. And even then, to just think that this is American consumerism is moronic. I cannot believe Tim Stanley has said this. And I also can't believe he brings up neoliberal project. The country has not been neoliberal since Thatcher. Okay, since John Major, probably even. Tony Blair moved quite quickly to post-Keynesianism and then accelerated it after the 2008 crash, and we have not got out of that paradigm since. It's an amazing thing I have to keep mentioning, but Enoch Powell was the first British neoliberal, and most of his point was simply that the move towards socialism is anti-British. Keeping a liberal economy is what makes Britain function and keeps it British. That was his point. So saying that neoliberalism is to blame, which is complete misattribution to post-Keynesianism, is completely wrong. It means that I'm basically just not going to listen to you on economics at all. It's like a question I ask people is, what do you think about rent controls? And if they say, yeah, they're good, don't listen to them on economics. They've clearly never read into it, because that is the first lesson you learn. Rent controls are bad. Even communists think that. Anyway, the leader of the SDP, William Clouston, thinks that this is spot on, because just to be quite frank, all the SDP are Labour, but no immigrants. That's all the SDP are, and if you get the SDP in, and you get Labour economics with no mass immigration, you will still see the same problems we are seeing today. It's just British culture might be slightly more defended. But again, the main way that British culture is able to keep going is effectively if it is financed. But if you ruin the economy, you're not going to have the financing to keep it British, are you? So I didn't expect this to turn into me saying the SDP suck, but the SDP suck. Don't vote for them. Social democracies tend to only work if you have a breadbasket to keep it funded. Scandinavia managed to do this via oil. That is basically the only reason that they have a national wealth fund and have pretty good social services. It's basically the only reason. But Britain keeps ruining its industries, keeps ruining its moneymakers aside from finance, and therefore doesn't have the money to actually improve anything. Public sector work, flatlined. Productivity just flatlined. Not improved since 2007. Private sector keeps going up, despite the fact that everything has been done to try and stop that by the state. Just do not trust anyone who thinks that the answer to our economic problems is in any way centralising the economy. It's not at all. It's already pretty much centralised. State spending something like half of GDP. That is the main thing that is stopping us from growing as a country and keeping the culture alive. The fact we have to keep paying to keep the NHS going despite the fact it's failing. We have to pay for social housing for people who aren't bothered to even be productive people. Hell, I think the latest stat was that out of all working age Muslim men, something like 1 in 5 are working. Again, it's a mixture of a lot of things. Mass immigration is definitely one of the main reasons people feel British culture is going, because all the places people feel British culture is going, Clapham, is places with a large amount of immigration. But honestly, this attitude was shared by an awful lot of the post-liberal types. This is the last one I'm going to read, but I'm not going to comment on it too much because you already get the idea. But again, it's free market capitalism. Sorry, just to read that specifically, any proper conservative worth their salt is suspicious of ultra-free market capitalism. Is this ultra-free market capitalism in the room with us right now, sir? Where is it? I don't see it anywhere. We can't even build data centres in the UK with 170-acre green parks that are accessible to by everyone in the local community because councils are hyper NIMBY. They hate business. They hate anything that's larger than a shoebox being built for business. Yeah, man, this ultra-free market capitalism, this capitalism where the private companies who are offering basically everything on a plate that would make a council popular is being stopped. 170-acre eco-green park. A park for the local community to use that basically everyone wants. still can't build it. In ultra-free market capitalism, they just buy the land and build it. That's how we got basically all of our train lines built. Hey, government, can we please build this train line to go all the way from London to Scotland? Yeah, we don't care. Rubber stamp, built within 5 years. It now takes over a decade to build a staircase at a main train station in a town. If you are saying the issue is free market capitalism, as far as I care, you deserve to be thrown in pig slop. You deserve the most humiliating punishment that I can think of, because it is so clear that you misunderstand the problems that we are having, that not only is it pointless listening to you, but other people should be discouraged from repeating your talking points because they are so stupid. Anyway, I would like it to make it clear to authorities who are no doubt scourging my social media feed and this YouTube channel that that was a joke. Obviously, I meant in Minecraft. Anyway, I will say I was glad to see Carl Benjamin, who is moving over to the post-liberal side, basically just avoid the whole capitalism comment in general, because it is just a trap. He points out that if it did have anything to do with immigration, that would make Sarkar culpable, as it would render her as part of the problem. And naturally she has to identify a self-serving reason why immigration must continue, so she doesn't have to shoulder any responsibility. Yeah, and pretty much. And to every idiot on the right who thinks that capitalism's the problem, if you end up agreeing with Ash Sarkar on anything and you say, oh, we need to be suspicious of capitalism, learn your history. Well, learn your goddamn history of Britain. What made Britain great? Free trade, wow, who would have thunk? And this is the thing, I'm completely on board with David Starkey's theory of why leftists and the left hate Britain. It's because they have no part in our history or our story. We completely rejected left-wing revolutions like those that we saw in France. How we rejected the Puritanism of Oliver Cromwell. He was in charge for 9 years. We thought we were better with a monarchy, brought them back, and then we hated Cromwell so much for what he did that we dug him up, and then we paraded him around a load of towns and cut his body into bits posthumously. But this also comes into the economic history of Britain. The left wing have basically no part in it. They won after 1945 with the post-war consensus, the building of the NHS, etc., etc. And basically it's been pretty much slow growth up until we had Margaret Thatcher, and then once again it's been pretty much stagnant since 2008. And that's because everything went left-wing. Oh, we had austerity. No, we didn't. Go look at any of my videos on Tom Nicholas. We did not have austerity. It's nonsense. But this is where we are. We have an incredibly moronic cohort of the right wing that hate capitalism because it's not British, despite the fact that British culture, for 2 centuries at the very least, was built around capitalism. We're called a nation of shopkeepers by Napoleon Bonaparte, for God's sake. Of course we're a country of capitalism. You have to reject all of these left-wing narratives because they're just going to destroy the country. They are what is making it unrecognisable. And if you're giving them an inch, well, look, they take miles and miles and miles and miles. And it ain't good. But I want a British culture that's a hell of a lot more traditional, rather than a hodgepodge of a whole load of people coming over here, and then even the people that say British culture isn't disappearing admit British culture is disappearing in places like Clapham. You know? Reject the left and everything they want. They are not good actors. Their ideas are god-awful. We need to return to the type of progressivism that Disraeli explained, where you're going to have progress, it's inevitable, but you keep the traditions strong. Anyway, I didn't think this would go on for 45 minutes, but here we are. Shilling time. The other side of the hill is tonight. We're going through the Rivers of Blood speech. Regional variation, still not sure if it's on tomorrow, but as I say, follow me on Twitter for updates on that. Laughing at the Guardian returns Saturday. I do have guests for that now, so please come along to that. And of course, videos will come out as usual. I mean, to be honest, I didn't think I was going to make one today, and then I saw these idiotic responses to Ash Sarkar's already idiotic points, and it just annoyed me to the point I had to make this video, so I hope that my rage soothed your soul for this Tuesday. Anyway, with that, that is everything I had for you for today, so once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.